What's going on, guys, and welcome back to part 8 of the Toyota Tacoma LS Swap build series. Today we're going to continue on our wiring, trying to get everything kind of tidied up, mount our PCM somewhere, and really there's just a lot of like little stuff that we need to do. We need to start on our exhaust system. I have to figure something out for my steering column, start running my fuel lines and brake lines and all these things. So I don't know what all we're going to get done in this video. But we're gonna just start kind of chipping away and just keep working, and I'm gonna let the camera roll. Alright guys, so after that last clip, I was kind of mulling things over, and I really didn't like the way, where the computer sat in the truck. These computers are really big and bulky, and I really don't have a good place to put it inside the cab. So I decided to move it out here, and I actually like the way it looks. I'm gonna kind of probably build some kind of a box around it. Right now everything's kind of laid out where it needs to go. I still have to trim all these wires, make them way shorter because they're super long. I have everything kind of laid out the way that I want it. All of my power feeds and ignition feeds are all kind of set aside. All my ground leads. So I'm gonna have to kind of figure that out. Once I figure out what I'm going to do for a fuse box, there might be enough room in the factory Toyota fuse box to include some of the circuits I need. I need a starter relay, fuel pump relay, fan relay, and some various fuses. I may be able to use that. So at this point, as far as wiring goes, all we really have to do now is, well, I shouldn't say all we have to do. This is going to be a lot of work, but we need to get the factory Toyota wiring, open that all up, remove the stuff we're not going to be using, just like we did with the Chevy wiring, and then we're going to install that in the truck and kind of combine the two where I need to do that. But before we do that, I wanted to address our steering column linkage. We need to figure out how we're going to route it around our exhaust manifold. And so what I've done is I've removed the steering column. So this is the part that's going to be inside the cab here, and then this attaches to the rack, and then these attach right at the firewall. So what I have here is a piece of a steering column. It's got 2 U-joints on it, and this is actually out of a Subaru WRX that I parted out. I bought it as a flood car, and it ended up needing way more work to get it running than it was going to be worth, so I ended up parting it out. So I had this left over, and I'm thinking that because basically what I need to do is I need to add another U-joint to this column in order to kind of work around the exhaust manifold. So what I'm thinking is I can kind of use pieces of this and combine the two, and maybe do some fab work here, and the only thing that I will need still is some sort of a support bearing, because anytime you have multiple, I think it's 3 or more U-joints, you need some sort of a support bearing to kind of support the column, because what'll happen is you'll kind of bind up the U-joints, so you need something to kind of support it to keep it from moving side to side. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get this, taken apart, cut it, and figure out a way to fab something up to kind of make this work. And then I can go ahead and I can add a support bearing later on. But the reason I want to do this now is because I want to know if I need to order more parts or whatnot. I can do that this week. New plan. So I have this is the stock shaft that came out of the truck. I have a piece of steel rod. This is solid steel rod, so this would be really strong, sufficient for a steering shaft. I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to weld this all the way around, and this will act sort of as like my drive shaft, you know, in between these two joints. The reason why I got to use this is this will clear the manifold, I believe, perfectly. So I'll weld this to this, and then I will weld the other end of this, depending on how, you know, I still don't know how long I'm going to cut it, but I'm going to weld that to this guy, and then I'll be able to then, you know, attach this to the stock shaft. So let's go ahead and do that. Guys, so there you have it. We combined our Subaru U-joint with our Toyota U-joint with a sort of makeshift, that's still hot, makeshift drive shaft deal. Welded it together. That thing is never coming apart. That is a solid piece. So let's get this thing installed in the truck, see if we can make it work. Alright guys, so we got the steering shaft installed, and throughout the week this week I actually ordered a steering shaft support bearing, and what I did was I welded a bracket onto the exhaust manifold because that was really like the only good place that I could do it. I wanted to weld a bracket to the frame, but I didn't really have a good spot, so I ended up welding it to the manifold, and then I have my support bearing coming off of that. As you can see, the bearing, basically it's adjustable, so you can adjust the length of it, and what it does is it supports the shaft from moving side to side. And as you can see, I have probably about 1/4 of an inch or so of room between the manifold and the steering shaft, so that should work. So now that we got that kind of figured out, now we can kind of keep plugging away here. Today I want to definitely get all of our wiring tidied up here. I got to shorten almost all of these wires, get our looming installed, get our fuel rail injectors on so we can get those wired up and plugged in. So let's go ahead and keep plugging away here. So real quick, I just wanted to get a shot of these fuel rails that I ordered. Now I actually got these from eBay, and they're really nice quality rails. They're solid, really nice quality machining. I actually ordered fuel rails from Summit Racing back in April, and they were back ordered for a couple weeks, and every time it would get close to the point where they would ship, they would get back ordered again and back ordered again. So finally I just canceled that order and I ordered these off of eBay. They were here in within a week. So we're gonna go ahead and get these installed, get our injectors in. That way we can figure out the lengths of our injector wires. And then I have some injector pigtails. Well, they're not pigtails, they're connectors, and they give you little pins for the EV1 style injectors. So we got to get those wired up. And so let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so we got our fuel rail installed. It looks like everything's gonna fit. I ended up putting the crossover in the front. I was thinking about putting it in the back and then running my fuel inlet in the front. But we didn't really have a lot of room in the back for this crossover, so we put it in the front, and then we adapted. I got an A-end quick disconnect, and then I have a 90-degree quick disconnect fitting here that we're gonna run from there all the way back to our regulator, and then there's just a plug on this port here. So now what we have to do is we need to wire in everything, obviously shorten up the whole harness, but we need to wire in our injector connectors, figure out the lengths on those. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so we got all of our engine wiring cleaned up. A lot of this stuff shortened. As you can see, this is all the wiring that was just extra slack. We kind of were able to get this stuff tucked pretty good. It looks really clean. We got wire looming installed some places. There's a harness that runs on the back side of here that I got like all taped up. I still got a lot of this stuff that I need to run later on. And then I'm gonna mount my PCM over here. So now begins the painstaking process of opening up our existing Toyota wiring harness and pulling out the stuff that we don't need and kind of routing that where we want it and tying it into our engine harness where necessary. So let's go ahead and start tearing this wiring open and kind of sorting through it.
Okay, so use that there. And run those that way. Tape this up, okay. Let me do that. So is that good for you? Is that good there?
All right, guys, so we've got about 90%, I'd say, of our wiring completed. We've ran all of our powers and grounds. I utilized the factory fuse box in order to include all my relays that I need. So I needed a starter relay. Obviously, we reused the starter relay from the factory Toyota fuse box. I just rewired it because in the Toyota, the starter is basically mechanically controlled via switches, via the ignition switch. On the LS platform, it's controlled by the PCM. So we went ahead and we ran our starter relay control wire through the inside to the starter relay. We used the EFI relay that was factory in the Toyota fuse box to supply power to our oxygen sensors, mass airflow, and then there was 2 ignition feeds for the PCM, which we tied all into the EFI relay. We have another fuse that I ran. We used a 20 amp fuse, and we used that to supply power to our injectors and our coils on both banks. What else? Fuel pump. We reused the fuel pump relay, which on the Toyota, for some reason, they call it a circuit opening relay, but it's literally just a fuel pump relay. That's all it does. But it's wired up a little bit differently on the Toyota, from factory from Toyota. So we reused the relay, but we wired it up a little bit differently. So we did that. That's inside the cab in the underdash fuse box. Let's see, what else did we do? There was something else, another fuse we used. I can't remember. But so at this point, everything is kind of awake. I have a jump pack hooked up. I kind of just have some, I've installed kind of temporarily a block ground and a body ground so that everything kind of works. Right now, I have HP tuners hooked up. It's now communicating with our computer, pulling information off the computer. I have it hooked up to our OBD. So as long as everything is as it should be, we should be able to read data from the computer. So let's see if this works. All right, so now we have our HP Tuner software. We have our interface hooked up to the truck and it communicates, so that's good. Everything looks to be working. Obviously, we have a bunch of DTCs. I have my oxygen sensors are not wired up yet because I have not ran my exhaust yet, so I didn't want to wire those up yet. It looks like I have vent solenoid code, transmission code, obviously, because we need to, we're using it manual transmissions. We need to turn that off. These codes you can turn off with HP tuners, so that's nice. So we need to do a lot of that stuff. So I guess at this point, what I want to do is I want to back out of here and I want to go back into HP tuners. That was the actual VCM scanner portion of it. So what I want to do now is go into HP tuners and see if we can, there's a way to turn off our anti-theft because I'm unable to make this thing crank. Well, I don't have my starter installed yet, but I wanted to see if I can turn the key, the crank position, and see if I have power coming out of my relay going to the starter solenoid, which means that if I had my starter installed, that it would actually crank. But I have to turn off my anti-theft in order to do that. I'm trying to see system. There it is, security, VATS control, none. So I believe it's off now, maybe? Let's go back in and see. Yeah. So let's see. Okay, so now that we disabled our VATs, or so we think we did, I also went in and I disabled or turned off a bunch of different DTCs, stuff like evap DTCs, downstream oxygen sensors, which we're not going to be running, things like that. I went ahead and got rid of those codes so they won't come back, just because it's just one less thing that I have to look at. So now what we have to do is we have to write this file, because basically what we've done is we've pulled the calibration file out of the factory PCM, and we've then manipulated it, and now we're going to rewrite that or flash that file back into the PCM. And once we do that, I'm going to hit write. It's going to write the file. And then once I do this, theoretically, if I did it right, when I go to crank the car, I should get a crank signal out of my starter relay. So let's see. Come on. Okay, so it says write completed. Close. So now, basically, what I've done here is because I don't have my starter installed yet, I just went ahead and I took a headlight bulb that I had laying around, and I just tied that into the load side of my starter relay. And this is the wire that would go down to my starter solenoid. So if I go and I crank the key and that light bulb lights up, that means that if I had my starter installed, it would crank. So let's see what happens. This key's on. Nothing. Let's see. All right, guys, so I think we got it all figured out here. When I went in here the first time, all I did really was I disabled my VATs, which would allow the car to start. But what I never really did or never thought to do was go into the transmission and select, this is obviously a manual transmission now, so the computer is going to be looking for automatic transmission inputs. I didn't think that was going to inhibit it from starting, because the way that I have it wired up, it shouldn't matter, but I think the computer is seeing something it doesn't like, and so it basically was preventing starter engagement. So I just went ahead and I changed that, and then I also, I went in and I reflashed it. So now, once I go in here, turn the key, we have light. So, like I said, if my starter was installed and I had it wired up, this thing would be cranking. So that is really good to see. We have about 90% of our wiring done. I still need to get a mass airflow, so I need to wire that up once I get it. There's a little rear harness that goes to the back to power up my fuel pump and my rear lights. But everything else just there's a few things that kind of still need tidied up. Some of these harnesses need taped up and things like that. But other than that, the wiring is done finally, because Lord knows wiring is a pain in the ass. I'm pretty good at wiring, and reading diagrams and things like that, but it's still, to kind of get it right and fine tune it, it can still be kind of a pain. So I'm glad that's out of the way. A lot of this other stuff, running brake lines and fuel lines and all that stuff, should be really quick and fairly easy. So hopefully we can have this truck running and driving here pretty soon. All right, so that is going to be it for today. Guys, once again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
and turn your post notifications on so you don't miss any future content. Hopefully in the next episode, we're gonna be able to get our fuel system completely finished, get our brake lines ran, cooling system, radiator installed, but we shall see. This week, I might be getting my drive shaft in. I'm not really sure. It was supposed to be done this past Friday. I haven't gotten any word of whether it's been shipped or not, but well, I guess we'll just have to play it by ear. But until next time, peace.